I'm dusting off Agnes's picture for the third time today. On May 7th, it will be exactly 3 years since she left. The Karelian birch frame is her choice. It will live longer than we will, Hubert. Agnes laughed as we picked it out at the antique shop on the corner of Foster Street. Now this frame will truly outlive us both. The house is quiet. The only sound is the ticking of the floor clock in the living room, a gift from my father on my and Agnes's silver wedding anniversary. 25 years together seemed like an eternity then, but now our 52 years together have flown by like a blink of an eye. It's strange, but since Agnes died, it's as if the clock has ticked louder. Sometimes I think it's counting down the time I have left. My house in Grand Prairie is too big for a lonely old man. 4 bedrooms, an office, a living room with a fireplace, a kitchen where Agnes made her famous apple pies. All of it now seems unnecessary and empty. The kids are grown and scattered, and only Frank is left. But he's rarely here, even though he lives in the same town. I walk up the stairs holding onto the banister. My knees aren't what they used to be. 75 years is taking its toll. When I was young, I built bridges that connected coasts, people, cities. Ironically, I never got to build a bridge to my own son. Frank, my only son. Once upon a time, a long time ago, he used to look at me with admiration, asking me to tell him about my work, about bridges and buildings. A little boy with freckles and bright blue eyes, just like Agnes. Daddy, I'm going to build too when I grow up, he used to say, building towers out of wooden cubes. But he didn't become a builder. He went into finance, became an analyst for a big company. Times have changed, Father. The future is in numbers, not concrete, he told me when he entered the university's economics department. I didn't argue. Every man is entitled to his own way. Upstairs in my office, I go to the window. A view of the garden that Agnes loves so much. It's in disrepair now. I let the gardener go 2 years ago. There's no point in maintaining a beauty that no one can appreciate. A few roses are still in bloom, but most of the plot is overgrown with weeds. I pull an album of photos out of my desk drawer. On the first page is Frank at age 5 on my shoulders. We're at the beach and I'm showing him the seagulls. The next one is Frank getting his high school diploma. I'm standing next to him, putting my hand on his shoulder. Agnes between us, so proud, and here are the later pictures. There are fewer of them, and the gaps between them are getting bigger. Frank with his university degree, Frank in his first job, Agnes and Frank and me at Christmas 7 years ago, the last time we all got together around this fireplace. When did we start to drift apart? I can't say exactly. Maybe when he went away to study and came back a different man, or when he started his career and became too busy for weekly family dinners, or when I didn't approve of his decision to leave a stable job for a risky startup that ended up going bust. After Agnes died, we saw each other at the funeral and then twice more, on Thanksgiving and on my birthday that year. Then there were only phone conversations, each time shorter and more formal. How are you, Dad? Everything okay? Well, I'm glad. I'm doing great. Got a lot of work to do. I'll call you next week. But the next week turned into the next month and then the next quarter. The phone rings as I flip through the last pages of the scrapbook. A rarity in my house, usually only telemarketers, and occasionally my old friend Walter call me. I leisurely walk downstairs and pick up the phone. Hello, I say in my creaky old man voice. Years and loneliness have made it even huskier. Dad, it's Frank. My son's voice sounds cheerful, almost playful. How are you? I'm getting by, I said. How are you? I've got great news. There's a note of genuine excitement in his voice. I'm getting married, Dad. I don't say anything for a few seconds. Frank is 39. He's never been married, though he brought home girls a few times when Agnes was alive. None of them lasted long. Congratulations, I finally say. Who is she? Her name is Esther Prescott. She works in public relations. We met at a conference 6 months ago. She's amazing, Dad. You're gonna love her. I can hear the same enthusiasm in his voice that he used to tell me about his cubes. I don't want to disappoint him, but something about this situation feels strange to me. Is 6 months too soon to decide to get married? That's great, Frank. I'm happy for you. The wedding's a month from today, the 23rd, at Lakeview Gardens. Do you know that place? I do, I said. Agnes and I were there for Walter's daughter's wedding. It's an expensive place overlooking the lake. Pretty soon, huh? Yeah, we decided to take it slow, he says with nervousness in his voice. Dad, I was wondering, we'd like you to come. The invitation sounds formal, like he's fulfilling a duty. I can sense it in his tone, in the way he hesitates before saying anything. We would like, not I would like, but we. It's as if the decision to invite me was made collectively. Of course I'll come, I say after a pause. You're my only son. Oh, that's great. Frank is obviously glad that this part of the conversation is over. I'll send you a formal invitation in the mail. It'll have all the details. Thank you, I reply. Maybe we should meet before the wedding. I'd like to meet Esther. There's another pause. I can hear Frank covering the microphone with his hand and talking to someone, probably to her. Yes, of course, he finally replies. We're having a pre-wedding dinner the week before the ceremony. You'll get an invitation too. Okay, I say, realizing there won't be a separate meeting. I'll be waiting. That's great, Dad. I've got to run. We've got a lot of preparations to make. I'll call you later, okay? Sure, I answer, knowing he won't call. Good luck with your preparations. After the call, I sit in the chair for a long time, looking out the window at the overgrown garden. My son is getting married, and I find out a month before the wedding. He doesn't ask for advice, doesn't come to tell me in person, doesn't introduce me to his future wife before the official events. And the call itself lasted less than 5 minutes. I get up and go to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Agnes liked tea with mint and honey. I make the same, though I've never been a big fan. A habit from when we used to drink tea together. The wedding. I'll need to buy a new suit. My last suit was the one I wore at Agnes' funeral. Not a good choice for a wedding. And then there's the present. What do fathers give their sons for weddings these days? It was simpler in my day. The groom's parents usually helped organize the wedding, paid for some of the expenses. But Frank didn't ask for help, didn't even mention the financial aspect of it. Maybe he and Esther are doing it on their own. Or more likely, Esther's parents are taking care of everything. I take my checkbook out of my desk drawer. After Agnes died, I made some changes to my investments. Now I have enough money to live comfortably and still leave a substantial inheritance. Frank is my only heir, though he doesn't know it. We've never discussed my finances. Maybe we should make a generous gift. Give them a head start, help them with a down payment on a house or something? $150,000 seems appropriate. Not too much to make them feel obligated, but enough to tangibly help. But then I remember Frank's tone, his formal invitation, the fact that he didn't take the time to introduce me to his fiancée before the pre-wedding dinner. And doubts creep into my soul. Does he really want me at his wedding? Or is this a tribute to tradition, a mandatory item on the guest list? The tea cools, and I sit staring at my checkbook. A decision has to be made, and there's not much time left. The invitation will come soon, and I'll have to respond. Should I even go to this wedding? Wouldn't it be better to just send a gift and a birthday card? Spare Frank from having to pretend he's glad I'm there? I get up and walk over to the window. It's starting to get dark outside. The day is coming to an end like so many other days in my life, in silence and solitude. Tomorrow I'll go to the bank and think things over. I still have time to decide how to proceed. After all, this is my only son's wedding. Despite our differences in distance, I'm still his father. And maybe this is a chance to start over. The formal invitation arrived 3 days after Frank called. A heavy cream paper envelope with gold embossing and inside calligraphy. Pleased to invite you to the marriage of Frank Cavendish and Esther Prescott. Impersonal you instead of dear father, or at least by name. A small but telling detail. Attached to the invitation was a card with information about the pre-wedding dinner. June 17th, 18 o'clock. Monaco Restaurant. Modestly underlined, for close relatives and friends only. And below that, in small print, dress code semi-formal. I put the invitation and card on the table. There wasn't much time left, and I needed to get ready. A new suit, a gift, maybe even a haircut and beard grooming. I didn't want to look like an unkempt old man at my own son's wedding. The next day I went to the mall. I hadn't been there in a long time. Since Agnes had gotten sick, shopping was no longer a part of my life. The crowds of people, the loud music, the brightly colored windows, it all made me uncomfortable. but I had to look dignified. At a men's clothing store, a young salesman with a well-groomed beard and tight pants helped me choose a navy blue suit. "Classics never go out of style, sir," he said, picking out a tie to match. I didn't argue, though the price seemed excessive. When you're 75, though, you realize that this suit might be the last one you ever wear. The gift-giving issue was simpler. I went to my bank and wrote a check for $150,000 in Frank's name, a sum that could help a young family get settled, perhaps make a down payment on a house, or even start a small business. I didn't wrap the check in a gift box or envelope. I figured I'd just hand it over at the wedding. The days before the pre-wedding dinner stretched slowly. I pored over old photographs, remembering Frank growing up, how Agnes and I had dreamed of his future. "He'll be happy, Hubert, you'll see," she'd say as we discussed his first serious college girlfriend. Agnes always believed in the best. I wonder what she would say now. The evening of the pre-wedding dinner came unexpectedly quickly. I put on my new suit, tied my tie. My fingers weren't as dexterous as they used to be. I had to work at it, and hailed a cab to the Monaco restaurant, an expensive place in the center of Grand Prairie, known for its Mediterranean cuisine and fine wines. I arrived exactly at the appointed time. At the entrance, I was met by the maitre d', who, after checking the list, escorted me to a separate room. About 20 people were already gathered there, mostly young people, probably friends of Esther and Frank. A few older people, must be the bride's parents and other relatives. Frank spotted me and walked over. He was wearing a light gray suit that emphasized his slim figure. He looked fit and trim at 39. He looked better than I did at his age. "Dad, I'm glad you could make it," he said, hugging me lightly. A formal gesture, no real warmth. "I wouldn't have missed an event like this, Frank," I replied, trying to smile. "You look good." "Thanks." He looked around, as if searching for someone. "Come on, I'll introduce you to Esther and her parents." He led me over to a group of people at the window. Among them stood out a young woman in an elegant black dress. Tall, slender, with long, dark hair arranged in an elaborate style and expressive brown eyes. Esther Prescott radiated a confidence and a kind of cold beauty that reminded me at once of the noir heroines that Agnes and I used to watch when we were young. "Sonina Durham." "Esther, dear," said Frank, "this is my father, Hubert Cavendish." She turned and gave me an appraising look. Her smile was as flawless as a magazine cover, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Cavendish, we meet at last," she said, extending her hand to shake. Her palm was cool and dry, the handshake firm and businesslike. "Frank has told me so little about you." There was something unpleasant in that phrase, like a rebuke. Not to Frank for not telling me enough, but to me for not having anything to say about me. "Likewise, Miss Prescott," I replied. "Unfortunately, Frank and I didn't get a chance to meet earlier, so I could learn more about you." Her smile wavered for a moment, but she quickly regained control. "Well, now we'll have plenty of time to get to know each other better. After all, we're becoming a family," she said the last word with a slight pressure, as if testing it for flavor. "Meet my parents," Esther continued, pointing to an elegant, middle-aged couple. "Robert and Vivian Prescott." Mr. Prescott, a trim man with graying temples and the keen eye of a financier, shook my hand. His wife, a well-groomed blonde in an expensive pearl necklace, nodded with a polite smile. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Cavendish," Robert Prescott said. "Esther tells me you were a civil engineer?" "Yes, for over 40 years, I replied. "Retired 5 years ago." "Interesting profession." He nodded without much interest. "I'm in finance, investment banking." "Frank told me you've been living alone in a big house since your wife died," Esther interjected, taking the conversation in an unexpected direction. "Imam, it must be hard to manage such a household at your age." Her words sounded like concern, but I could detect something else in her tone, as if she were probing the ground. "I can manage," I answered briefly. "I'm used to my house." "But you don't plan to live there forever, do you?" she continued. "In such a big house, all alone?" Frank coughed, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "Esther, let's not talk about this now," he said quietly. I'm just worried about your father, dear," she replied with the same fake smile. "At his age, living alone can be dangerous. You know, my friends and I often discuss nursing homes for our parents. There's wonderful care, companionship." "I prefer my own home," I interrupted firmly. And I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Of course you are, she waved me away. Just thinking out loud. The mayor announced that dinner was served, and we all moved to a long table set with exquisite simplicity. I was seated between Esther's cousin, a silent girl of about 25, and an elderly uncle on the bride's side. Frank and Esther sat at the far end of the table, surrounded by their friends. The dinner had a relaxed atmosphere for everyone but me. I felt like an outsider at this celebration of life. The young people were discussing the latest movies, traveling, fancy restaurants. Occasionally, one of the guests would address me with a polite question, but quickly lost interest in my answers. After the main course, Frank made a toast, thanking everyone for their presence. He mentioned my contribution to his life in passing. Thank you to my father, who is with us today. Not a word about how I raised him, how I supported him in all his endeavors, how I paid for his education. Just a formal mention, as if on a guest list. Esther, for her part, scattered her thanks to her parents. For your example of a perfect marriage, for your support and love, for everything you've taught me. Her mother wept. Her father nodded proudly. When the waiters brought dessert, Esther suddenly moved over to me. Her movements were graceful, like a predator approaching its prey. Mr. Cavendish, she began, stabbing a piece of cake on her fork. Frank tells me you had your own business? A small engineering firm, I replied. Nothing big, but successful enough to give you a comfortable retirement, wasn't it? There was a calculating glint in her eyes. I'm not complaining. And that house of yours in the suburbs, did Frank mention it's got 4 bedrooms and a big lot? I was beginning to see where this conversation was going, and I didn't like it. Have you made a will yet, Mr. Cavendish? She asked bluntly, not even trying to hide her interest. It's important at your age, so there won't be any misunderstandings later. I looked at her carefully. At that moment, she reminded me not of a noir movie heroine, but rather of a vulture circling a potential prey. My papers are in order, Miss Prescott, I said coldly. There's no need to worry. No need to worry, she laughed, but it wasn't sincere. It's just that I work with people, and I know how many problems arise when things like this aren't thought out in advance. I want Frank to have no more trouble when, you know, when I die, I finished for her. You don't have to mince words, Miss Prescott. At my age, I'm not afraid of words like that anymore. She was slightly embarrassed, but quickly regained her composure. I just want what's best for our family, Mr. Cavendish, she said, with emphasis on the word our. Frank is very worried about you, even though he doesn't show it. I didn't believe a word she said. It was all an act, an attempt to find out my financial situation and plans for my inheritance. Tell him I'm all right, I said, and I'm quite capable of handling all my affairs on my own. Esther obviously wanted to continue the conversation, but at that moment Frank came up to us. Is everything all right? He asked, looking from me to Esther. Siminum. Of course, darling, she smiled. I'm just getting to know your father better. Daddy doesn't like to talk business at dinner, Frank remarked, and I was surprised that he still remembered such details about my habits. That's all right, I said. Your fiancé is just being considerate. Frank nodded, but there was doubt in his gaze. He knew me well enough to know that I wasn't telling the whole truth. Suck, I should probably get going, I said, getting up. It had been a long day, and at my age you get tired quickly. Are you leaving already? Esther asked with feigned disappointment. But there was so much we had not yet discussed. Some other time, I said. I'll see you at the wedding. Frank volunteered to walk me to the cab. When we left the restaurant, the evening air seemed especially fresh after the stuffy hall. I'm sorry about Esther, Frank said suddenly. She can be a little too straightforward. That's all right, I replied. Everyone has a right to be curious. We stood side by side, but there was a gulf between us. The son I'd once known was gone, and this new Frank I didn't understand. Are you sure this is what you want? I asked quietly. This wedding, Esther. Are you happy? Frank tensed. Of course I'm sure, he answered sharply. I love Esther. She loves me. What more do you need? Nothing. I held up my hands in a conciliatory gesture. Just asking. The cab pulled up, and I headed for it. Dad, Frank called out to me. You're coming to the wedding, aren't you? There was something like genuine concern in his voice. Maybe deep down, he was still that little boy who wanted to make his father proud. Of course I'll come, I answered. I promised. All the way home, I thought about the upcoming wedding and what I'd seen today. Esther was obviously more interested in my financial situation and possible inheritance than in me as a person. Frank seemed to either not notice it or take it for granted. Or maybe he even liked it. At home, I pulled out my checkbook. The check for $150,000 that I had written earlier was in an envelope on the table. I picked it up and stared at the numbers for a long time. A generous gift from a father to his son. But after tonight, I wasn't sure I wanted to give it anymore. At least not in such a straightforward way. What if I just brought a check to the wedding instead? I wouldn't talk about it beforehand. I'd see how things developed before deciding whether or not to present it. I tucked the check into the inside pocket of my new suit. That's where it'll be waiting for the wedding day. In the meantime, I'll keep a close eye on my son and his bride. I had a hunch that things were not as they should be, and I've learned to trust that feeling in my 75 years of life. The day of the wedding was unusually clear and warm. I woke up early, before the first rays of the sun. Old age has its disadvantages. Sleep becomes shallow, sensitive. The slightest rustle, creaking floorboards. Even your own thoughts can wake you up in the middle of the night. This time it was my thoughts that woke me up. Anxious premonitions did not leave me since the pre-wedding dinner. Lying in bed, I looked up at the bedroom ceiling. The familiar cracks, the cobwebs in the corner I'd never gotten around to cleaning. Agnes wouldn't approve of such untidiness. "Hubert, you've gone wild," she'd say reproachfully, but with a warm twinkle in her eye. "I know, darling," I whispered into the emptiness of the room. "It's not the same without you." I got up slowly, fighting the morning stiffness in my joints, and wandered to the bathroom. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon, leaving me plenty of time to clean up. I decided to shave extra carefully, trimmed my gray mustache, and even used the cologne Agnes had given me for our last New Year's Eve together. I didn't feel like having breakfast. I drank a cup of strong tea and flipped through the morning paper, not really taking in the news. My thoughts kept returning to the upcoming wedding. How would Frank react if I actually presented him with a check for such a large sum? And Esther, after the conversation at the pre-wedding dinner, I got the impression that she was more interested in my money than in my family relations. I pulled a carefully ironed suit out of the closet. It was dark blue with barely noticeable texture, austere but not somber. "Just right for a wedding," the salesman said, and I agreed with him. Navy-colored tie, off-white shirt, shined shoes. I wanted to look dignified. After all, I was the father of the groom. From a dresser drawer, I pulled an envelope with a check. $150,000, a sum that could give the young ones a good start. Help with buying a house, maybe even starting his own business for Frank. I had invested so much in this gift, not only of money, but of hope for reconciliation, for the revitalization of our relationship. I tucked the envelope into the inside pocket of my jacket, closer to my heart. Let it sit there until the right moment. I still wasn't sure whether I should give it to her at the wedding or whether it would be better to do it later, in a more intimate setting. The decision would come of its own accord when the time came. At 12:30, I called a cab. I wanted to arrive early so I could take a leisurely stroll around Lakeview Gardens. Agnes had always liked the place, the manicured lawns, the flower beds, the old-fashioned gazebo by the water. We were there for Walter's daughter's wedding many years ago, and Agnes said, "Imagine how lovely it would be if our children were married in a place like this." Well, at least one wish of hers has come true. Lakeview Gardens greeted me with holiday cheer. The uniformed staff was making final preparations. White chairs stood in rows in front of an archway, decorated with fresh flowers, and the pathway to it was strewn with rose petals. Everything looked perfect, like in a movie, or on the pages of a glossy magazine. I wonder how much it had cost, and who paid. Frank or Esther's parents. He didn't offer to help me with the costs, though he knew I could help. I strolled slowly around the grounds, enjoying the quiet before the storm of festivities. Soon there would be congratulations, music, and the laughter of guests. In the meantime, one could enjoy the peace and beauty of the place. "Mr. Cavendish," a young man in an austere suit called out to me. The guests are already beginning to gather in the main hall. Let me show you out. I nodded and followed him. There were already quite a few people gathered in the spacious hall, decorated in white and gold colors. I recognized a few from the pre-wedding dinner, but most of them were unfamiliar to me. Waiters were serving champagne and light hors d'oeuvres. I took a glass, but didn't drink it. Alcohol at my age doesn't give me the pleasure it used to. Mr. Cavendish, Vivian Prescott, Esther's mother, came up to me, wearing an elegant cream suit and a diamond necklace around her neck. I'm glad you came. How are you feeling? Quite well, thank you, I replied. It's a beautiful day for a wedding. Oh yes, we were so lucky with the weather. She nodded. Esther wanted an outdoor ceremony and thank goodness it's not going to rain. Where's the groom himself? I asked. I'd like to talk to Frank before the ceremony. Oh, he's in a private room with the groomsmen. She waved her hand toward the hallway. But no one's allowed in there right now. Pre-wedding traditions, you understand. I did. In my day, though, the father of the groom was sure to give his son final instructions before such an important step. My own father spoke to me for almost an hour before I married Agnes. His words still echo in my memory. Son, marriage is not a harbor, but a voyage. In both the calm and the storm, stick together, and then the ship will not crash on the rocks. The ceremony began at exactly 2 o'clock. The guests took their seats, and I sat in the front row as the father of the groom is supposed to do. There was an empty seat next to me, a reminder of Agnes's absence. She should have been sitting there, holding my hand, furtively wiping away tears of happiness. The music started, and Frank walked down the aisle with the priest. My son looked gorgeous, in a classic black tuxedo, his hair impeccably styled, statuesque, confident. For a moment I saw my young self in him, and my throat tightened with unwanted tenderness. Then the wedding march sounded, and all heads turned toward the beginning of the aisle. Esther appeared under the arm of her father. Her dress was a work of art, cream-colored, with open shoulders and a long train embroidered with small pearls. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure adorned with fresh flowers. She was incredibly beautiful. There was no denying it. The ceremony was conducted according to all the rules. The exchange of vows, the rings, the first kiss as husband and wife. Everything was flawless, like a well-rehearsed performance. I furtively brushed away a tear, thinking how proud Agnes would have been of that moment, despite all the difficulties in our relationship with Frank. After the ceremony, guests were invited to a buffet, while the newlyweds and their closest friends went off to take pictures. I wasn't included in this group, so I didn't insist. Instead, I slowly made my way around the tables of treats, occasionally exchanging pleasantries with other guests. The main celebration began an hour later in the banquet hall. The tables were arranged in a U shape, with a table for the newlyweds, their parents and closest friends at the head. I was placed at the next table, next to some distant relatives of Esther. It was odd the father of the groom is usually seated at the head table, but I didn't bother to bring it up. After all, it was their day, and they had the right to organize it as they saw fit. Toasts were made during dinner. Frank's best man, his co-worker, told some funny stories from their past together. The maid of honor gushed about what a wonderful friend Esther was and how lucky she was to have found a man like Frank. Esther's parents gave a touching speech about how proud they were of their daughter and how happy they were to welcome Frank into their family. I wasn't asked to make a toast. No one even mentioned that I was the father of the groom. It was as if my role in Frank's life had been erased from the official version of his biography. I tried not to take it personally, but the bitterness still lingered inside. After dessert, the dancing began. Frank and Esther opened the evening with the traditional first dance, then Esther danced with her father. In a normal situation, Frank should have asked the mother of the bride to dance, but instead he danced with one of the bridesmaids. Another odd choice, another little deviation from tradition that somehow hurt me more than it should have. I sat at my table, watching the fun from the sidelines. Couples were dancing, waiters were serving champagne, and music was playing. The general merriment only emphasized my loneliness. The gift table was littered with boxes, envelopes, and packages. I brought nothing but a check in my inside pocket. My gift didn't need holiday wrapping. Its value wasn't in the pretty wrapping, but in the amount and the intentions with which I prepared it. I waited for the right moment to take Frank and Esther aside and hand them the check in private. But they were constantly surrounded by friends, family, and photographers. It was almost impossible to approach them. Finally, taking a moment when Frank was alone at the bar for a minute, I approached him. "Congratulations, son," I said, hugging him lightly. The ceremony was beautiful. "Thanks, Dad," he replied in what seemed to me to be a sincere manner. "I'm glad you could make it. I have a gift for you and Esther," I continued. "Shuckum, I'd like to give it to you both." "Of course," Frank nodded. "I'll go find Esther." He left and I waited at the bar, sipping mineral water. A few minutes later, Frank returned with Esther under his arm. She was radiant with happiness, though her smile faded slightly when she saw me. "Mr. Cavendish," she said with feigned warmth. "Frank said you wanted to talk to us?" "Yes," I answered. I wanted to give you my present." I started to pull an envelope from my inside pocket, but Esther interrupted me. "Oh, so you have a present after all? I was beginning to worry that you had come empty-handed." Her tone was joking, but I saw something else in her eyes: calculation, impatience, greed. "I never come to my son's wedding without a gift," I replied calmly, continuing to pull out the envelope. "It's just weird that all the guests brought their gifts to the table and there was nothing from you," Esther continued, raising her voice enough that several of the closest guests turned in our direction. "Frank and I even thought that maybe in retirement it was hard for you to afford such an expense." I froze with the half-extracted envelope. Her words, spoken with a smile, but with obvious disdain, hit harder than she could have intended. Frank stood beside me, eyes downcast, not interfering, not defending me, not stopping his newfound wife. "Esther, I think—" Frank started hesitantly, but she didn't let him finish. "No, darling, let's get this straight." Her voice became even louder, attracting the attention of the whole room. "Your father came to our wedding, ate our food, drank our champagne, but didn't bother to bring a gift like all the other guests." By now, a small crowd had gathered around us. The music had died down and all eyes were on the three of us. I felt the color of shame flood my face, though it wasn't me who should be ashamed. "Perhaps Mr. Cavendish had forgotten a little thing like a wedding present," Esther went on, speaking more to the audience than to me. "At his age, forgetfulness is forgivable." Someone in the crowd chuckled. Frank stood as if paralyzed, not saying a word, not defending me, his father. "I haven't forgotten," I answered quietly but firmly. "My present is here, in this envelope." "Oh, in the envelope!" Esther exclaimed with theatrical surprise. "Let me guess. It contains a card with touching wishes and a check for $100? Or perhaps as much as $200? By now, a lot of people were laughing. I looked at Frank, hoping to see a twinge of sympathy, shame, anything that would show he was still my son. But he was looking somewhere past me, avoiding my gaze. "Esther, maybe we shouldn't," he began but was interrupted again. "What has such a beggar forgotten at this celebration?" Esther said loudly, giving me a contemptuous glance from head to foot. "Get out! You're spoiling the party with your pathetic appearance." There was dead silence. No one expected the situation to go this far. Even Esther's closest friends looked shocked by her words. I slowly pulled the envelope out of my pocket. At that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't show the check. Instead, I just ripped it in half. Then again, and again, and again until there were no more shreds left in my hands. "Too bad," I said calmly, looking straight into Esther's eyes. "It was $150,000 for the start of your new life." I threw the scraps of envelope and check on the floor. Esther turned pale, her eyes widening with shock and the sudden realization of her mistake. Frank finally looked at me, and in his gaze I saw a mixture of horror, shame, and despair. "Dad," he whispered, taking a step toward me. "I didn't know." "Yeah. Have a good day, Frank," I said, turning to leave. "Congratulations on getting married. I hope you got what you wanted." I walked across the room and the guests parted before me like the waters of the Red Sea. No one dared look me in the eye. No one said a word. It was not until I was at the door that I heard Esther shouting hysterically to Frank, "Stop him! That's 150,000. Frank, do something. But I had already left the room without turning around. My chest felt empty and heavy at the same time. I had just lost my son, or maybe I'd lost him a lot sooner. I just didn't want to admit it. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the fresh evening air. The sky was already beginning to darken, the first stars appearing on the horizon. I looked out at the lake, at the gazebo where Frank and Esther had exchanged their vows of fidelity a few hours ago. What a naive old man I'd been, thinking we could start over, that my gift would help mend the relationship. I called a cab through an app on my phone, one of the few modern conveniences I've mastered. As I waited for the car, I thought about what had happened, about what would happen next. Strangely, I felt no anger, or even any particular bitterness. Only fatigue and a strange relief, as if the heavy weight of illusions I had carried for years had been lifted from my shoulders. The cab arrived 10 minutes later. In that time, no one came out of the hall to find me, to talk to me, to apologize, not Frank or anyone else. I got in the car and gave my address. "The wedding?" the driver asked, nodding at my suit. "Was," I answered briefly. He realized I wasn't in the mood for conversation and turned on some soft music. All the way home, I stared out the window at the streets of Grand Prairie floating by. The city I'd lived in most of my life suddenly seemed foreign, unfamiliar. At home, the first thing I did was to take off my suit and hang it carefully in the closet. I wouldn't need it anymore. I put on an old robe, poured myself a glass of water. My thoughts flowed slowly like molasses. My son, my flesh and blood, let his wife humiliate me in front of dozens of people. He didn't stand up, didn't stop her, didn't have the courage to say a word in my defense. I thought about my father, how he would have acted in my place. He was a man of strict rules, old school. "Family is everything," he used to say. But what do you do when your family betrays you? If your only son chooses to side with a woman who only sees you as a wallet? I picked up Agnes's picture from the table. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed especially bitter now. "You were right about Frank, darling," I said quietly. "You always saw through people better than I did." She said that Frank was too easily influenced, that he lacked an inner core. I didn't want to believe it, defended him, said he was just young, that things would change with age. She shook her head and replied, "Hubert, you're too kind to him. It won't change him." The phone rang, interrupting my musings. Frank's number. I hesitated for a second, then rejected the call. Not now, maybe never. Some things can't be fixed with a simple, "I'm sorry." Some wounds don't heal. I climbed the stairs to my office. There, in a desk drawer, lay the papers I'd been putting off for so long. The will, the powers of attorney, the bank papers. It was time to get serious about them. It was time to recognize that my son was not the man I could trust with my legacy. I woke up to the phone ringing. It must have been ringing for more than a minute, insistently intruding on my heavy, dreamless sleep. My head was buzzing. I'd had a couple of glasses of whiskey last night, which was unwise for me, who hadn't had a drink in years. I struggled to reach the bedside table and glance at the screen. Walter. My old friend was one of the few people who regularly checked on my well-being after Agnes's death. "Hello." My voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. "Hubert! At last! I've been calling you since this morning." Walter's voice sounded agitated. "Are you all right?" "More or less," I answered, sitting up on the bed. "What happened?" "I heard about yesterday's incident last night," he said carefully, "at Frank's wedding." I closed my eyes. So the news had already spread. Not surprising in a town like Grand Prairie, gossip spreads faster than wildfire. "Who did you hear it from?" I asked, though it didn't really matter. "My sister's son was there. He called her last night, told her." Walter was quiet for a second. "Hubert, is it true you tore up a check for $150,000? "Ah, it's true," I answered, remembering the moment when the scraps of paper fell at the feet of the stunned Esther. "Every word," Walter whistled. "The damn girl deserved it," he said with sudden anger. "Ryan says she made you look like a beggar in front of all the guests. It's outrageous. It's not about her." I rubbed my temples, trying to get rid of the headache. It was Frank. He stood there and didn't say a word, didn't protect me. His father. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "I'm sorry, Hubert." Walter said at last. You didn't deserve to be treated like that. Not from her, not from him. Thank you, friend. Is there anything I can do for you? You want me to stop by your place? Not today, Walter. I need some time to myself. We talked for a few more minutes, and I hung up. The missed call indicator on the phone was blinking. 5 from Frank, 2 from an unknown number. Probably Esther. A few text messages I didn't bother opening. Let them wait. Or not. I didn't care. I went down to the kitchen, put the kettle on. My head still hurt, but not as badly. My mouth was dry, and I drank a glass of water greedily. Then I took an aspirin out of the cupboard and swallowed it. Agnes had always scolded me for swallowing pills dry, said it could burn my esophagus. But Agnes was gone, and there was no one to scold me. The kettle boiled, I brewed a strong tea, added honey and lemon, an old hangover cure my father had taught me. Drink this, son, and in an hour you'll be as good as new, he used to say. My father knew a thing or two about such things. He used to drink the bottle when he was young, but unlike many of his friends, he managed to stop in time. With a cup of tea, I went into the living room and sat down in my favorite chair. From here, I had a view of the garden, once manicured but now neglected. The rose bushes that Agnes had loved so much were feral, the lawn overgrown with weeds. I should have done the garden, but I couldn't find the strength. Maybe later, maybe never. The doorbell rang. I froze, unmoving. It rang again, more insistent. Then came a knock on the door. Daddy! Frank's voice came from the porch. Daddy, I know you're home. Open up, please. I didn't answer, continuing to sit still. The knocking grew louder. Daddy, we need to talk. It's important. I took a sip of tea, savoring the tart flavor. Frank kept knocking and calling me, but I remained deaf to his pleas. After many minutes of futile attempts, I heard him give up. The car door slammed, the engine rumbled, and soon the sound of the departing car dissolved into the silence of the morning. Only then did I get up and walk to the door. There was a white envelope on the mat. I picked it up. Light, it clearly didn't contain a check or cash. Opening the envelope, I found a note inside written in Frank's familiar handwriting. Dad, please give me a chance to explain myself. What happened yesterday is unforgivable. I should have protected you. Call me when you're ready to talk. Frank. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash can. Too little. Too late. The day stretched on slowly. I tried to read, but the letters blurred before my eyes. I turned on the TV, but the meaningless noise only annoyed me. Finally, I decided to sort through old photo albums, an activity I usually put off because it hurt. But today the pain was exactly what I needed, to displace one pain with another. In the attic, a large wooden chest held dozens of albums, neatly organized by year by Agnes. She had always been pedantic about such things. Family history must be preserved, she used to say, signing each photo with the date and place. I pulled out the first album, Our Wedding to Agnes, 55 years ago. Me in a black suit, she in a white dress her mother had made. We were so young, so full of hopes and plans. No expensive restaurants or fancy ceremonies. A modest celebration in church and a reception at my parents' house. But how much happiness was in our eyes. The next album is Frank's birth. Agnes is in the hospital room, tired but radiant with happiness. I'm next to her, holding a small bundle with a red wrinkled face. Our firstborn, our pride and joy. He'll look like you, Hubert, Agnes said then, and I felt a lump come to my throat. Album after album. Frank's first steps, his first day of school, his high school graduation, his entry into college. The photos capture his growing up, his transformation from a curious boy to a confident young man. When exactly did something go wrong? When did that crack appear between us that eventually turned into a chasm? Maybe it started when he decided not to follow in my footsteps. When he chose finance over engineering? No, I never pressured him. I respected his choice. Maybe when he moved to another city to study and started coming back less and less often? Also no, it's a natural process. Children grow up and leave their parents' home. I came across a picture that made me freeze. Frank, about 10 years old, sits on my shoulders on the beach. We are both laughing, the sun blinding our eyes. Agnes took this picture during our vacation to the coast. It was a happy time. Before Agnes's illness, before the estrangement with Frank, before all the losses and disappointments that old age brought. The phone rang again. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Probably Esther. I rejected the call, but a minute later the phone rang again. Same number. After the fifth ring, I couldn't bear to answer it. Yes? Mr. Cavendish? A woman's voice, but it wasn't Esther. Younger, more insecure. It's Lisa, the maid of honor at last night's wedding. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. To what do I owe the honor? Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Her voice shook. What Esther did was awful. We were all in shock. I've never seen her so cruel. Are you calling at her request? I asked, not hiding my suspicion. No, not at all. She'd kill me if she knew. She laughed nervously. I just thought you should know that not everyone supports what happened. Many of the guests were outraged by her behavior. Thank you for the information, I replied dryly. Is that it? Yeah, I guess so, she paused. I just wanted to let you know. I thanked her and hung up. It was an odd call. Maybe she really wanted to show kindness. Or more likely, it was a ploy by Esther, trying to find out how angry I was and if there was anything I could do to make things right. By late afternoon, a few more messages came in from Frank. In one, he wrote that he and Esther had postponed their honeymoon and wanted to meet with me to talk things over. Another begged me to at least reply, to let him know I was okay. In a third, offered to come with Esther so she could apologize in person. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop, ancient by modern standards but perfectly adequate for my modest needs, and found the number of my attorney, Michael Thornton. We hadn't spoken in years, not since he'd helped me with the paperwork after Agnes's death, but I had every reason to believe he was still practicing. The letter was short and to the point. Michael, I need to make changes to my will. Please contact me to schedule an appointment. I sent it and closed the laptop. The first step had been taken. The night was restless. I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. Frank's face was in front of me the moment I tore up the check. Shock, disbelief, then the realization of loss. Not the loss of my father, the loss of the money. I pictured Esther throwing herself on her knees, picking up scraps of paper, trying to put them together like a jigsaw puzzle. Useless, of course. The bank would never accept such a check. Toward morning, I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep, and when I woke up, it was almost noon. New missed calls and messages on my phone. From Frank, from Esther, even Esther's parents. It was a real siege, but I wasn't about to give up. A reply from the lawyer came quickly. He offered to meet tomorrow at 15 o'clock at his office. I confirmed the meeting, feeling strangely relieved. At least one case would be over with. There was still one more thing I had to do. I called the bank and spoke to the manager who had handled my accounts for years. Mr. Cavendish, how can I help you? Her voice was professionally friendly. Miss Harris, I need to make some changes to my bank accounts and investments, I said. It concerns access and inheritance rights. Of course, sir. You'll need to come to the branch with your ID. When would be convenient for you? We made an appointment for the next day, right after the visit to the lawyer. The cases were beginning to take shape, and that gave me strength. In the evening, as I sat in the living room with a book I couldn't bring myself to read, the doorbell rang. This time I didn't pretend I wasn't home. I went to the door and opened it. Standing on the threshold was Esther, alone, without Frank. She was dressed more modestly than usual. Jeans, a simple blouse, minimal makeup. Clearly trying to look more approachable, less arrogant, but her eyes betrayed her cold calculation. Mr. Cavendish, she began with a pre-rehearsed smile, I've come to apologize for my behavior at the wedding. It was inexcusable, and I am fully aware of my guilt. I remained silent, not inviting her in, not responding to her pseudo-apology. Frank is very worried, she continued, seeing that I wasn't reacting. He's afraid he's lost you forever. We both hope that you will find it in your heart to forgive us. Where's Frank? I asked, finally breaking the silence. She was a little confused. He's at work. He had an important meeting that couldn't be canceled, she stammered. He wanted to come, but I told him I could handle it. Women are sometimes better at handling these delicate matters, aren't they? So apologizing for insulting your husband's father is a delicate matter? that's better handled without the husband himself? I let the sarcasm seep into my voice. Esther blushed. That's not what I meant. You know what, Esther? I interrupted her. I don't care. I don't care what you meant, what you feel, what you regret. I don't even care how Frank feels. You've both made your choices, and I've made mine. But Mr. Cavendish, her voice trembled, and there were tears in her eyes, artful but fake. We're family. Isn't family supposed to forgive? You're not my family, I answered firmly. And Frank stopped being my family the moment he let you humiliate me in front of everyone. That's not what a real family does. I started to close the door, but she put her foot down, preventing me from doing so. Wait. Her voice changed, more insistent, more like her real nature. You can't just give up your own son. What about, she stammered, clearly hesitant to say the word inheritance. But I understood. What about my money? I finished it for her. Don't worry, I've made sure it's in good hands, not yours. Now her face was twisted with rage, the mask of benevolence completely gone. You can't disinherit Frank. He's your only son. I can, I said calmly. And I will. Tomorrow. With those words, I closed the door, ignoring her screams and banging. A few minutes later, I heard tires screeching. She drove away, probably to report to Frank about the failure of her mission. I went back into the living room and sat down in a chair. Strangely, I felt better after that conversation. It was as if the last of my doubts had dissipated, and the decision I had made was finally solidified in my mind. Frank had made his choice. I had made mine. Our paths had diverged, and there was no point in trying to save what was already broken. I took Agnes's picture from the table and looked at her smiling face for a long time. What would you say now, dear? I asked quietly. There was no answer, of course, but somehow I was sure she would approve of my decision. Agnes never tolerated lies and betrayal, especially from people close to her. The phone rang again. Frank. I rejected the call and blocked his number for the first time in a long time. Then I did the same with Esther's number. That was enough. It was time to move on, even if on meant a lonely old age without the son I'd once loved more than anything in the world. I went upstairs to the bedroom and opened the dresser. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of sweaters, was a worn leather folder. It contained all my important documents. My birth certificate, my marriage certificate to Agnes, her death certificate, the deed to the house, my old will. I took out the last one and read it over carefully. It was simple and straightforward. All my property went to Frank on my death. That was what I decided after Agnes died, when there was no one closer than my only son. But now everything had changed. I took out a pen and resolutely crossed out my will crosswise. It had no legal effect, but it was strangely satisfying. Tomorrow the lawyer would prepare new paperwork and everything would be official. I put the folder back in the dresser and went to the window. The night was quiet, starry. Somewhere out there, among the stars, was Agnes. I had never been a particularly religious person, but I wanted to believe that she was somehow watching me, that she knew that I had stayed true to our principles, to our values. Good night, darling, I whispered, touching my fingers to the cold glass. See you later. The morning was surprisingly clear. I woke up at first light, feeling strangely light, as if the weight that had been weighing on my shoulders for years had finally begun to recede. For the first time in a long time, I didn't lie in bed, staring at the ceiling and putting off the inevitable rise. Instead, I got up immediately, showered, and shaved thoroughly. Looking at my reflection in the fogged bathroom mirror, I noticed that I looked different. The wrinkles hadn't gone away, of course, nor had the bags under my eyes, gray eyebrows, and sagging cheeks. But the look had changed. Instead of tired doom, there was determination. I looked at myself not as an old man broken by life, but as a man who could still make important decisions. A new day, Hubert, I said to my reflection. A new life. After breakfast, I put on my second-best suit, the gray pinstriped one that Agnes had given me for my 70th birthday, the same one I buried her in 3 years ago, the navy blue one I'd bought for Frank's wedding. I'd sworn I'd never wear in public again. Too many bitter memories. Michael Thornton's office was in the business section of Grand Prairie, in a modern glass building I remembered still under construction. I was one of the engineers consulting on the foundation project. Ironically, I had now come here to destroy what I once thought was the unshakable foundation of my life, the notion that family came first. Michael met me in the reception area of his office, a trim, elegant man in his early 50s, with a faint gray on his temples and a confident handshake. We'd known each other for over 20 years, ever since he'd helped me with legal matters in the expansion of my engineering firm. "Hubert, it's good to see you," he said as he ushered me into his office. "Although I must admit I was surprised by your letter." "Why?" I asked, sitting down in the leather chair across from his desk. "Well, your last will was drawn up so unambiguous. All assets to Frank, with no conditions or stipulations." He looked at me carefully. "Did something happen?" I told him briefly about the wedding, the humiliation, the torn check. Michael listened without interrupting, only occasionally frowning and shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Hubert," he said when I finished. "Frank always seemed like a reasonable young man to me. I can't believe he let this happen." "I couldn't believe it either," I replied, "but the fact remains. And now I want to amend my will. I want to exclude Frank from inheritance altogether." Michael nodded, but there was concern in his eyes. "Are you sure you don't want to wait a little longer?" "Making decisions like this on emotion." "Gira, I'm not emotional," I interrupted him firmly. "I've thought this through carefully. Frank made his choice, and I've made mine." Michael nodded again, this time without objection. "Okay, to whom do you want to leave your property?" That's a question I'd thought about beforehand, too. Some of it to charity, St. Elizabeth's Children's Hospice, which Agnes supported, and the Engineers Education Trust, which I helped set up. And the rest, him, the rest. I've been thinking. I want to set up a trust fund for young people who want to study engineering but can't afford an education. The idea came to me last night as I was reflecting on my life. I remembered how my father, a simple laborer, saved every cent to send me to college. How I fought for a scholarship, how I worked part-time at night to pay for my textbooks. The world has changed, but the struggle of youth for education has not. I could help at least a few of them. Michael smiled approvingly. "That's a great idea, Hubert. We can structure the fund so that it will function for years after—" He hesitated. "After I'm dead," I finished for him. "You can call things by their proper names, Michael. At my age, death isn't as frightening as it used to be." We spent almost 2 hours discussing the details of the new will. Michael asked clarifying questions, took notes, explained the legal intricacies. In the end, we came to an agreement. 80% of my estate would go to a trust fund for engineering students, 10% to St. Elizabeth's Children's Hospice, and another 10% to the Engineers Education Foundation. "What about personal effects?" Michael asked. "Photo albums, furniture, things with sentimental value," I wondered. The thought that all those things that held the memory of Agnes, of our life together, might end up in a landfill or be sold at auction was unpleasant. Would it be possible to include a clause in the will for Walter Bryce, my old friend, to choose what he thought should be kept? The rest could be sold and the proceeds added to the trust fund. "Of course," Michael nodded. "We can make him the executor of that part of the will." When the details were finalized, Michael promised to have the documents ready within a few days. We shook hands, and I walked out of his office feeling like I'd lifted a heavy weight off my shoulders. The next stop was the bank. The meeting with Ms. Harris was quick and businesslike. I changed powers of attorney, removed Frank from the list of people with access to the safe deposit box, and gave instructions regarding my investments. Ms. Harris, professional to the core, didn't ask too many questions, though I'm sure word of the wedding scandal had reached her by now. Walking out of the bank, I felt hungry. It was a strange feeling. The last few days I'd had little appetite, eating out of habit rather than desire. But now, after the important meetings, I was suddenly hungry for a proper meal. There was a small Italian restaurant not far from the bank, where Agnes and I sometimes went on special days. Mario's was a simple place with red and white checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh pastries. I decided to go in. Inside, almost nothing had changed over the years. The same tables, the same paintings of Venice and Rome on the walls, the same vintage coffee machine behind the bar. Even Mario, the gray-haired Italian with the bushy mustache, was still there, though now more sitting at the cash register than bustling between tables. "Signor Cavendish," he exclaimed when he saw me. What a joy! How many years? How many winters? Hello, Mario, I smiled, touched by his sincere enthusiasm. It's been a long time since I've been here. Not since your beautiful Agnes left, he nodded with sincere sadness. Her memory is bright. Such a woman. Such a woman. He escorted me to a table in the corner, my favorite, and personally took my order. I chose the spaghetti with seafood, a dish Agnes had always ordered. I don't know why I wanted it today, but Mario nodded approvingly and retreated to the kitchen to oversee the preparation. While I was waiting for my order, Walter walked into the restaurant. I hadn't seen him since he'd called me after the wedding, but his appearance here and now didn't seem like such a coincidence. Grand Prairie is a small town, and it's only natural to meet someone you know in one of the few decent restaurants downtown. Walter spotted me almost immediately and waved me over to my table. "Do you mind if I join you?" he asked, pushing back his chair. "I'd be glad of the company," I replied sincerely. Walter was one of the few people I still felt comfortable with. We'd been friends for almost 40 years, ever since we'd worked together on the City Bridge project. He was a surveyor. I was a civil engineer. Different specialties, but shared values and a similar sense of humor brought us closer together. Even our wives became friends, and we often spent evenings together playing cards or just talking over a glass of wine. After the death of his wife Dorothy 5 years ago, and then Agnes, our meetings became less frequent, but the friendship remained. "How are you?" Walter asked as the waiter took his order and left. "Better than one might expect," I answered honestly. "Changed my will today. Frank won't get another dime." Walter nodded without surprise. "I would have done the same thing," he said. "After what's happened, hell, Hubert, I still can't believe he just stood there and did nothing. Even if it hadn't been his father, but just an older man, it was still necessary to intervene." I didn't bother to tell him that I'd been thinking about it constantly since the wedding, that I'd mentally replayed that scene over and over again, hoping to find an excuse for Frank's behavior. But he hadn't. "Charity. You know," Walter continued, sipping the wine he'd brought, "I've always thought Frank looked like you. The same look, the same way of talking. But now I realize I was wrong. You would never allow yourself that kind of weakness. You would never betray someone you cared about for what? For a woman who sees him only as a purse and social status? Son, we don't know what's really between them," I said, surprised that I was still trying to find an excuse for my son. "Come on, Hubert," Walter snorted. "I've seen women like that. Dorothy worked in real estate, remember? She used to talk about clients who chose a house not because they liked it, but because it made the right impression, who asked if the neighborhood was prestigious enough that their children would go to school with the children of the right people. Your sister-in-law is of the same breed. And Frank, well, apparently he found exactly what he was looking for." I didn't answer. Our entrees arrived and we ate in silence for a while. The spaghetti was just the way Agnes liked it, with plenty of seafood and a light, sweet, and spicy sauce. I realized that for the first time in a long time I was really enjoying the food. "I'm thinking of selling the house," I said as we moved on to dessert. Walter raised his eyebrows. "Really? You always said you were going to die in this house." "Things have changed," I shrugged. "Too many memories, and too big for one old man." "Where do you plan to move to?" "I haven't decided yet," I answered. "Maybe to another city. A fresh start." Walter twirled his fork thoughtfully in his hand. "You know, my daughter Sarah lives in Berwyn. It's a small town about 2 hours from here. She wrote me the other day that there's a nice house for sale near there. 1 story, with a little garden. Maybe you should check it out." I'd never been to Berwyn, but I knew it was a quiet, cozy town with a good climate and a measured life. The perfect place for an older person who wants peace. "Maybe," I nodded, "though I'm not sure I want to live near my friend's family. I don't want to be a burden." "It's nothing," Walter said. "Sarah will be glad. She's always loved you. Remember how you helped her with math in high school? And her husband David is a good guy, an architect. You'll have a lot to talk about." The idea was starting to sound more and more appealing. New town, new people. But Walter's family, with whom I'd always had a warm relationship, would be nearby. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thanks for the offer." After lunch, we went for a walk in the park, which was nearby. The day was warm and sunny, and a walk seemed like a nice idea. We walked slowly, as two old men should, discussing everything from politics to the latest sports news, from new books to old movies. Not once did we mention Frank, his wife, or the wedding. It was as if the topic had been exhausted. It wasn't until we sat down to rest on a bench by the fountain that Walter returned to the personal. "You know, Hubert," he said, looking at the children playing nearby, "I admire the way you're handling all this. A lot of people would break down if they were you." "I did," I admitted. "That night after the wedding, I thought I couldn't get up. But I did. I guess I did," I nodded, because I realized one simple thing. Life goes on, even when it seems like it's over. As long as you're breathing, you always have the choice of giving up or moving on. Walter put his hand on my shoulder. "And you chose to keep going." "What else is there to do?" I smiled weakly. "At my age, every day is a gift, and I don't want to waste it on bitterness and resentment." We sat like that for another hour or so, watching the life of the park, the children, the young couples, the other old people who, like us, had come to enjoy the nice weather. Gradually, the conversation turned again to the topic of moving. "If you're serious about Berwyn," Walter said, "I can call Sarah today. She'll get the details on that house." "Yes, please," I nodded, surprised at my own resolve. "And if she can, have her find out if there's a real estate agent nearby who can help me sell my house." "Consider it done," Walter patted my shoulder. "A new life, Hubert. A new chapter." I returned home that evening feeling strangely light. The idea of moving, which had seemed vague and uncertain in the morning, had become a concrete plan by that evening. Berwyn, a small house with a garden, Walter's family next door, new people who don't know my history, who aren't whispering behind my back about the scandal at the wedding. I walked around the house I lived in most of my life, as if saying goodbye to it. Every room held memories, happy and bitter. This is where Frank took his first steps. This is where Agnes and I celebrated our golden wedding. This is where she died in our bedroom, holding my hand and whispering that she loved me. In the study, I pulled out of my desk drawer an old box of photographs that I hadn't yet had time to sort through and paste into albums. There were pictures from different periods of our lives, from our honeymoon to Agnes's last days. There were a few pictures of Frank, too, his graduation, his first job, our last Christmas dinner together. I stared at those pictures for a long time, trying to figure out at what point everything went wrong. When did my son stop being the man I raised him to be and become a man who could stand by while his mother was humiliated? Was it a gradual process, imperceptible day by day, or an abrupt change brought on by a specific event? Finding no answer, I gathered the pictures back into the box. What did it matter now? The fact remained that the man I had considered my son, my heir not only in a material but also in a spiritual sense, had turned out to be a stranger. And it had to be accepted, no matter how painful it was. I sat down at the table and took out a piece of paper and a pen. I began to make a list of things I needed to do before moving. Unpacking. Decide what to take with me and what to leave behind. Find a real estate agent. Find out about medical facilities in Berwyn, important at my age. The list was long, but not daunting. Rather, it evoked a sense of anticipation, as if I was preparing for a trip rather than a move to another city. The phone rang as I was finishing the list. It was Walter. "Hubert, I talked to Sarah," he said without preamble. "She's thrilled with the idea that you could be her neighbor, and the house is still available. 1 story, 3 bedrooms, living room with fireplace, small garden with fruit trees. Sound good?" "It sounds perfect," I replied, surprised at how exactly the description matched what I wanted. "When can I see it?" "Sarah says anytime. The owners have already moved out. The house is empty. She could show it tomorrow. She has the keys from the agent." I thought about my schedule for the next few days. Nothing much, no appointments, no commitments, nothing to keep me in Grand Prairie. "Tomorrow works," I said. "I can leave in the morning." "Great," Walter exclaimed. "I'll go with you. It's been a long time since I've seen Sarah and the grandchildren. I'll give you moral support." We agreed on a departure time, and I hung up the phone. Everything was happening so fast I barely had time to realize the changes. Just a week ago, I was preparing for my son's wedding, thinking about how to present him with a check, how to mend relationships. Now I was planning a move to another city, changing my will, and starting a new life without Frank. Life is unpredictable, especially when you're 75. You'd think at that age you'd be ready for a quiet old age with your family. But fate had it differently. And strange to say, I was almost grateful for it. For the opportunity to start over, for the chance to live the rest of my days not as a broken old man, but as a man who could still make decisions and take responsibility for his life. I went to bed earlier than usual, feeling pleasantly tired from a busy day. There was a lot to do tomorrow: a trip to Berwyn, a house inspection, maybe even the first steps toward a purchase. A new chapter in my life was beginning, and I was ready to turn the page. Exactly 1 year had passed since the day I tore up a check for $150,000 at my son's wedding. A whole year of a new life that turned out to be so different from the one before that sometimes I hardly recognized myself. Berwyn met me on a cool June morning when Walter and I arrived to look at the house. A small, neat little town with chestnut alleys and old-fashioned lanterns. A central square with a fountain. A church with stained glass windows that glow all the colors of the rainbow on sunny days. Quiet streets with well-kept houses. Small stores where the shopkeepers know the customers by name. I fell in love with Berwyn at first sight. It had everything I'd missed about Grand Prairie in recent years. Quiet, measured, uncluttered. And importantly, no one here knew about my history. No one whispered behind my back about the scandal at my son's wedding. The house Walter's daughter Sarah had shown me was perfect for a lonely old man. One story, with 3 small bedrooms, a bright living room, a cozy kitchen, and a terrace overlooking the garden. No stairs, no thresholds, as if designed specifically for someone with arthritis. The garden was small, but with a few fruit trees and flower beds waiting for caring hands. I bought the house almost immediately without even haggling. The price was reasonable, especially considering that my old house in Grand Prairie had sold for much more. The deal went quickly, and within a month I moved out, leaving behind not only the city I'd lived in most of my life, but also the bitter memories associated with it. Walter helped with the move. We selected things that were worth taking with us. Some furniture, books, photo albums, clothes, and personal belongings. The rest I either sold or gave to charity. I put Frank's photos in a separate box and left them in the old house. Let the new owners decide what to do with them. Only Agnes's picture I carefully packed up and put on the mantelpiece in the new house on the first day. Sarah and her husband David helped me settle in. Their house was only 3 blocks from mine, and for the first time Sarah stopped by almost every day, bringing home-cooked meals and asking if I needed help. Her children, 12-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Jake, also visited me often. Emma was interested in architecture. I guess she took after her father. And I told her about the famous buildings I'd helped design. Jake was more interested in technology, and we took apart and reassembled an old radio I'd found in the attic of the new house. Gradually, I began to get used to the new rhythm of life. Morning walks in the park, reading in the garden, evening games of chess with David. On weekends, we often had family dinners, to which Walter sometimes came. I even started attending the local senior citizens club, where I met several interesting conversationalists. I became especially close to Howard Page, a former literature professor who, like me, had recently moved to Berwyn. He was 78, had been a widower for over a decade, and we found much in common. Howard introduced me to the local library where his daughter worked, and we often spent time there discussing books or just talking about life. Another of my new hobbies was gardening. Agnes used to do it, and I only helped her occasionally. Now I've started to cultivate my little garden myself. The rose beds that my wife loved so much, the beds of herbs that I used for cooking, the fruit trees that had to be tended. Working in the garden was strangely satisfying. To see a plant grow from a small seed, to see it bloom, to see it bear fruit. It was a reminder of the cyclical nature of life, that even after winter there is always spring. The more time passed, the less I remembered the events of the previous year. Frank and his wife gradually began to turn into vague figures from a past life, like characters in a book I had read and put aside. Sometimes, of course, I thought about how they lived, what was happening to them, but these thoughts were no longer painful, more like a philosophical reflection on the vicissitudes of fate. My attorney, Michael Thornton, called occasionally to report on legal formalities related to the trust fund I had established. This year, the first 5 students received scholarships from my fund. All of them were studying engineering, all came from poor families, and all had excellent results. Michael sent me their pictures and short biographies, and I was pleased to see that my money went to really deserving young people. Michael didn't say anything about Frank, and I didn't ask. Although I suppose he might have told me if my son had tried to contest the new will or otherwise interfere with my affairs. But apparently nothing of the sort ever happened. And so, one warm June day, exactly 1 year after the ill-fated wedding, I was sitting in a small cafe in Berwyn Central Square. It was my and Howard's favorite place, cozy, with good coffee and fresh baked goods. We usually met there on Thursdays, discussing books we'd read, local news, and sometimes playing chess. That day, Howard was late. His daughter had some problem at the library, and he went to help. I sat at a table by the window, sipping my usual latte and leafing through the local paper. Nothing particularly interesting. A report on the school festival, an announcement of the summer fair, the results of the town election, the peaceful, provincial life that was now my life, too. The bell above the cafe door jingled, announcing new customers. I looked up from the paper and froze. Standing in the doorway were Frank and Esther. I hadn't seen them in a year, but I recognized them instantly. Frank looked older, with new wrinkles around his eyes and more gray hair on his temples. Esther, on the other hand, seemed as well-groomed and elegant as ever, though something in her look had changed. Gone was the self-assurance, the arrogance that had struck me when we first met. They didn't notice me right away, stopping at the counter to order. I had a few seconds to decide what to do. I could walk away, avoiding an unpleasant encounter. I could stay and pretend I hadn't noticed them, or I could stay and face them. I chose the third. During that year, I had rethought a lot of things, realized a lot about myself and life. I was no longer afraid of this encounter. I felt neither fear nor anger, only curiosity and perhaps a slight sadness. Frank saw me first. He froze half-heartedly, his face a mixture of surprise, hope, and fear. He said something to Esther, and she too turned in my direction. Their reactions were different. Frank seemed unsure, almost embarrassed, while Esther quickly took on a determined look, as if preparing for battle. They approached my table holding hands, a gesture that should have been a show of unity but looked strained. "Dad," Frank said, his voice low and uncertain. "What an unexpected meeting." "Unexpected," I agreed, folding the paper. "What brings you to Berwyn? As I recall, there's nothing particularly noteworthy here for tourists. We were looking for you," Frank said, as if making a confession. "We heard you'd moved here. We wanted to talk." I pointed to the empty chairs at my table. "Have a seat, since you've come all this way." They sat across from me. Esther put her purse on the table, an expensive crocodile leather purse with gold clasps. Such a purse was worth at least several $1,000s. I wondered, I thought, where they got the money for such things if, as I suspected, they had come to ask for financial help. "How are you, Dad?" Frank asked. "You're looking good. You've gotten better." It was true. Living in Berwyn had done me good. Regular walks, working in the garden, home-cooked meals that I'd learned to make myself, and, importantly, the lack of stress had made me healthier and more energetic than I'd been a year ago. "Thank you," I replied. "Life here suits me just fine." "And how are you? How has your first year of married life been?" Frank and Esther exchanged quick glances. Something was obviously wrong. "We're fine," Esther replied, smiling her trademark smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's just been some financial difficulties lately." "Oh, that's it. My suspicions are confirmed." "Oh, yeah." I took a sip of coffee, watching them over my cup. "What kind of trouble?" "The company I was working for went bankrupt," Frank began. "I lost my job 6 months ago. I've been trying to find something suitable ever since, but the job market is tough. And I took a sabbatical," Esther added as if justifying herself. "I wanted to focus on my lifestyle blog, but monetization is going slower than I'd hoped." I nodded, not showing my thoughts. "A lifestyle blog? Of course it is. Much more important than finding a job when your husband is unemployed." "And what can I do to help?" I asked bluntly, deciding not to beat around the bush. "I assume you're not just here to say hello." Frank looked embarrassed, but Esther quickly took the initiative. We wanted to apologize, she said with a look of genuine remorse on her face. I don't know if she had taken acting lessons, but she was convincing. What happened at the wedding was unforgivable. I behaved terribly, and I have no excuse. And me, Frank continued, I should have protected you, Dad. I should have stopped Esther, said something, done something. But I just stood there and watched. There's no forgiveness for me. I looked at them, these two people who had broken my heart a year ago and now sat before me, feigning remorse. Were their words sincere? Maybe a little. Frank, I think, did feel some guilt. But the main motive for their visit, I was sure, was money. I accept your apology, I said calmly. What's past is past. I don't hold grudges anymore. Their faces brightened, especially Esther's. She even took my hand, a gesture that was supposed to express gratitude but made me want to wash my hands. Thank you, Dad, Frank said, visibly relieved. It means a lot to us. So, you're not angry? Esther asked, still holding my hand. Can we be a family again? I gently but firmly released my hand from her grip. I'm not angry, I confirmed. But that doesn't mean things will go back to the way they were. Too much has changed this year. I've changed. You've changed too, I suppose. But we want to make things right, Esther insisted. A fresh start. Maybe you could, help us get back on our feet? Only temporarily, of course. As soon as Frank finds a new job, we'll get every penny back. That's it. The real reason for their visit, expressed in almost unvarnished terms. Money, always just money. I changed my will, I said bluntly, looking Frank in the eye. Right after the wedding. You're no longer my heir. My entire fortune will go to charity into a trust fund for engineering students. Frank's face showed shock, but not surprise. He must have suspected something like that. Esther could not hide her disappointment and anger, though she quickly tried to pull herself together. But Papa, Frank began, that's not what we mean. We're not waiting for your inheritance. We just want help now, in a time of need. Shira, help, I repeated thoughtfully. What kind of help do you expect? Well, maybe you could lend us some money, Esther suggested, trying to make her voice sound careless. Would you say 4,000 or 5,000? Just to pay the rent and bills until Frank finds a job. I looked at her purse, then at her hands adorned with expensive rings, at her designer clothes. Then I looked at Frank, who was dressed more modestly but still looked like someone who wasn't in serious financial trouble. I can give you some advice, I said at last. Sell your expensive things. Start with that purse, Esther. It's worth at least 3,000, I reckon. Then the rings. Frank's watch is a Rolex, isn't it? A few thousand more. The car you drove, I saw it through the window, a brand new Lexus. Trade it in for something more modest. The difference will cover your expenses for a few months. And of course, get a job. Any job if necessary. Pride is a luxury you can't afford when you can't pay the rent. Esther looked as if I'd slapped her. Frank just stared at the table without saying a word. Are you refusing to help us? Esther asked, her voice shaking with ill-contained rage. To your only son? I have offered you the most valuable help I can give, I replied calmly. Advice based on life experience. If you're really struggling financially, start by evaluating your spending and cutting back on unnecessary spending. Live within your means, work hard. That's what my father taught me and what I've tried to pass on to Frank. At that moment, the bell above the door jingled again, and Howard entered the cafe. When he saw me, he waved and headed toward our table. He was followed by Sarah and her daughter Emma. Hubert, Howard said, coming closer. Sorry I'm late. Oh, you have company? Yes, I smiled, pointing to Frank and Esther. This is my son Frank and his wife Esther. They're passing through town. Frank, Esther, this is my friend Howard Page and I stammered for a second, my family, Sarah and Emma. Sarah smiled warmly, extending her hand. It's so nice to meet you, she said. Hubert has told me so much about you. It was a lie. I hardly ever talked about Frank, and if I did, it was only in passing. But Sarah was a kind soul who always tried to smooth over awkward situations. Emma, a 12-year-old girl with pigtails and a lively, intelligent gaze, also extended her hand. Hello, she said politely. Your daddy is teaching me engineering. We're building a spaghetti bridge for a school project. Frank and Esther looked confused, but mechanically shook the outstretched hands. Would you like to join us? Howard suggested, pulling up an extra chair. "Na kun." We were going to discuss a new book for our book club. Hubert insists on Dickens, but I'm more in favor of modern prose. No, thank you, Esther replied quickly, standing up. We were just leaving. We have business in town. Frank got up too, looking awkward and unsure. Yeah, we should go, he said. Dad, can we talk some more? I looked at my son, the man I'd once loved more than anything in the world, the man I'd raised, the man I'd given everything I had. He seemed almost alien to me now. Or maybe I finally saw him as he had always been, without the veil of parental love that had clouded my vision. If you want, I said calmly, you know where I live. The door is always open to you if you come with good intentions. Frank nodded without saying a word, and he and Esther left the cafe quickly. Through the window, I watched them get into a brand new black Lexus and drive away. Well, I guess their financial problems weren't as serious as they tried to make it seem. Was that your son? Howard asked after they left. The one you had the misunderstanding with? Yes, I answered, turning back to my cold coffee. That's the one. What did they want? Sarah sat down next to me, putting her hand on my shoulder in a supportive gesture. Money, I shrugged. What else would they want? And you didn't give them any. It wasn't a question, but a statement from Howard. No, I confirmed. I gave them advice that was more valuable than money, though I doubt they appreciated it. You did the right thing, Grandpa Hubert, Emma said, unconsciously using an address that had come into its own over the year. She wasn't my granddaughter by blood, but she had become closer to me over the year than the siblings I'd never had. If people only come to you for money, they are not real friends. From the mouth of a child, this truth sounded especially simple and clear. I smiled and stroked her head. You're right, dear. You're absolutely right. We spent another couple hours in the cafe, discussing books, planning next weekend's trip to the lake, talking about everything but Frank and Esther. And I was grateful for that. Grateful that these people, Howard, Sarah, Emma, had become my new family. A family that valued me not for my money, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. In the evening, sitting on the terrace of my new home and watching the sunset, I pondered the vicissitudes of fate. Who would have thought a year ago, on that terrible day at Frank's wedding, that humiliation and betrayal would lead me to a new, happier life? That the loss of my son would open the door to new relationships, new attachments, a new family, not bound by blood, but bound by something more important: mutual respect and genuine care. Agnes's picture stood on the table next to me. I raised my teacup as if in a toast. You know, darling, I said quietly, I think things have turned out exactly as they should have. Not the way we planned, but maybe even better. Of course, she didn't answer, but I took the summer breeze that swept through the garden at that moment, making the roses sway as her agreement. Agnes had always been wiser than me. She must have known from the beginning that real family is not necessarily those who are related to you by blood. A real family is those who stay with you in times of need, who appreciate you for who you are, not for what you can give them. And Frank and Esther? Well, I didn't hate them, just regret and maybe a little pity. They would never know what I now knew, that true wealth is not in a bank account, but in a relationship based on love and mutual respect. I was 76 years old and starting a new life, a new chapter full of new possibilities, new horizons, and frankly, I couldn't wait to see what else this life would bring me.